our next speaker is somebody that I truly admire with everything that he's accomplished and also the work that he has done and what I have personally experienced and used. So I'm really, really excited to hear what he has to say. Ladies and gentlemen, the founder of Mulesoft, Russ Mason. Russ, thank you.
All right, hi everyone. How's it going? English okay? I'll try and slow down because I speak very fast, especially when I'm talking about something I really care about. So I'll slow it down today. Actually, I'm quite lucky I'm here at all. Yesterday, I love Zurich. I love the food you can get here. I ate something, and about 3 in the morning, it decided to attack me. So I got to thank the scheduling gods that I wasn't on first today because I would have been an absolute mess, but I'm feeling okay now. And I'm going to talk a bit about Mulesoft and some of the big challenges we solved. But before I start, I should probably just check, who's heard of Mulesoft? Okay, a few of you. So for those who haven't, Mulesoft is still actually an enterprise software company. Our mission was to connect applications, data, and devices no matter where they were. And of course, over the last 10 years, the number of applications, data, and devices have all shot up tremendously. So we were sort of well-timed in the market. But what makes Mulesoft quite interesting is we were tackling a space that was already fairly botched. Right, connecting things together has been a sort of a staple of many organizations, from IBM to TIBCO to Informatica, for 10 years before we even hit the market. And people actually thought that you couldn't make money out of integration, and it was kind of this, it was called a necessary evil. So, I don't know why I would go into a business where people think it's a necessary evil, but I just felt that you could actually leverage data and capabilities much more effectively if you unlocked and connected things the right way. And so what Mulesoft did really well, we did 3 things that I think are very pertinent to anyone in any size company thinking about how to scale, grow, and for those who don't know the Mulesoft story, we were, like I say, a software integration company. We went public in 2017. I started the company in 2006, and we sold to Salesforce in 2018, and it's still one of the largest software acquisitions to date in the market. So a lot of people often ask me, especially if they understand the space, is how on earth did you manage to do that when most people who tackle middleware and integration don't get so successful? And there was really 3 things that we did quite well in our journey, and they're focused on the product itself, right? So anyone, I gather no one has a product or is building a product, so maybe this isn't relevant to you. But if you ever do build a product, product's actually pretty important, but it's not the only thing. The other thing I'm going to talk about is hiring. And then finally, which I think is the most interesting because it applies to anyone in any organization, is go-to-market, the way in which you attach your product to the market and create value is really interesting to me. It's one of the things that I love to talk about with the founders I work with. So since leaving Mulesoft, I started a VC firm called Dig Ventures, and we focus on enterprise SaaS companies, and they all struggle with these 3 things: product market fit, how to push a product out to market, even how to release the product, but also how to hire, right? So these are general themes that I think everyone struggles with. And so at Mulesoft, I think the first thing we did right, and we didn't even realize how right we did it, to be honest, was we took an existing category, integration, and we looked at every other integration piece of software out there, and we decided that, you know what, when you're connecting applications together, you don't need all these different products because essentially all you're really doing is making connections between things. It was a bit like the early days of networking before we had TCP/IP. Right? You had all these different networking protocols to connect things together, and then the internet came along, and we realized you could connect everything over TCP/IP, and suddenly networking became a relative non-issue. I mean, obviously we have Wi-Fi issues all the time, but actually networking is fairly straightforward. So as Mulesoft, we thought, well, why can't we apply the same thinking to integration? So we created a piece of software where you could connect anything in any sort of pattern. And at the time, it seemed like a great idea, and the folks at the hackathon, any of you who are going to the hackathon, you'll probably be thinking about looking at what's already out there and how you improve software or capabilities that already exist. For us, we did it this way, and then we realized nobody cared, right? We created this very clever piece of software where you could connect anything, but when people looked at it, they just looked at it as any other piece of integration software, and we kept getting compared to our sort of rivals at the time, which was TIBCO, it was Dell Boomi, it was even Apogee to some degree on the API side. And we found it very, very hard to differentiate. And the differentiation in your software is sometimes extremely difficult to get to because people look at you in a certain way. Right? You have to tackle a category, and when you tackle a category, that category is defined by the people that already exist in it. And creating a new category, especially when you're starting a company, is really difficult. So how do you move between creating something new within a category, not being painted the same way, but actually expanding your market and creating a successful software company? And so for us, that came down to go-to-market, right? And go-to-market, for me, is probably the most interesting aspect of starting any company or building any company, which is you're trying to figure out not just product market fit, not just is there demand in the market for the software that you create, and then can you repeatably serve that demand and generate revenue. That's the basics of go-to-market and product market fit. But there's actually another more interesting element to delivering software to a market, which is product buyer fit. And what I see more often than not, that people build a product that actually has value. They can see that there's room in the market for this type of software. But what they don't do a good enough job of is figuring out who actually they're going to sell it to, right? So, and I'm going to use a few examples because people all do different things. But if you're building developer products or middleware, which is where Mulesoft was, you build the software for developers, but developers don't have any budget. And what I've seen from the companies that I invest in is they don't think long or hard enough about, okay, developers like it, but how do I actually reach the economic buyer to get them to understand the value of this software? And there's all these, I think, myths in the market that if especially in enterprise software, that if you have a good product, it gets adopted, you're going to win. And I'll give you some examples, like Docker, for example, was a massive player in the container space, but it actually didn't go anywhere because while they had massive adoption, they didn't figure out how to reach an economic buyer so they could see the value of that software. So the thing that actually makes or breaks you when you start a company is not just having a products that differentiated, but actually figuring out how you're actually going to sell it versus how people are going to use it. And at Mulesoft, we actually realized that even though architects and developers were the ones using our software, we had to attach value to integration to the economic buyer, which in our case was CIOs, so the chief information officer in organizations. The problem is with CIOs, and if you're building enterprise software, everyone goes to the CIO first, is for the last 10 years, that economic buyer has been bombarded with requests from the business. The hair is on fire 90% of the time, and they don't want to talk to vendors because they haven't had a great run of buying software and it really changing their outcome. So what we did at Mulesoft, we decided to, rather than try and sell CIO software, we started to help them understand what was going on in the market and what was going on in their business. And this was a really interesting tact because our conversations were never about products. So for the last 5 years, I met with probably 500 prospects or customers. I never spoke about the product. What I spoke about were the challenges that organizations were facing with the rise of technology trends, but also digital transformation. Basically, the trends came first, and then transformation was really trying to get organizations to figure out, okay, well, how do we leverage all this data? How do we unlock our key digital capabilities? How do we enable people all the way across the organization to get successful in accessing and using the tools that are available without introducing more new software, right? And so the conversations we had were really around helping that CIO understand how to describe the problem they had, because quite often what we found is they were in the middle of it, they couldn't really see that they were battling with the wrong things. So quite often they're always thinking about, okay, what's our big data strategy? But they weren't thinking about what's the change management of big data so that other people in the organization outside of the core data teams could actually get access to it. And so we spent a lot of time with those prospects thinking about, okay, if we can describe to them what their problem is and they can actually listen to us, and then we can tell them how other companies are solving these problems, then by virtue, they're going to come to us when they want a product. And it's a dangerous strategy because, frankly, you know, our salespeople had a very, very hard time going into a meeting and not selling something. They just couldn't get their head around this. They were like, but why would, if I've only got 30 minutes with this guy, why wouldn't I not tell him about how great our software is? And the reason is that CIO doesn't need to know how great our software is right now. What they need is some insight into the market, some insight to the pain that they're feeling, or some insight into the way other people in their position are solving some of the problems they're having to deal with, right? And I think now, especially in enterprise software, if you're building an enterprise software company, I don't think you can sell software anymore. I think there's too much software out there. We've sort of hit this saturation, and the way you have to sell to people is really help them understand and empathize with the problems they're going through and help them give a framework of how to think about solving the problems going forward. The software is almost really secondary or even tertiary conversation, which is the how do you actually solve it with software, right? So, you know, if I had one key piece of advice from our Mulesoft journey it was shifting that mindset of ourselves from we want to build great software for developers to we have to build great software developers. That's kind of the table stakes. But in order to sell the software, we have to convince the economic buyer that there's real value in using our platform to connect things together. And bear in mind, you know, 5 years ago, you could not get a CIO to talk about integration. It was just something they delegated down to their architects. And we were kind of lucky because there was a lot of technology adoption happening. And we sort of hit this inflection point where digital transformation became a really key point for CEOs and CIOs. And so we could get them in the room together and give them some insight. It allowed us to go a lot further with that customer. And the way this played out was pretty interesting. So we probably got to about 20 million in revenue at Mulesoft before we made that go-to-market change. So before that, what we were selling was integration. And the problem with selling any kind of middleware or any developer product is once it's in the organization and it's running in production, it disappears. Like nobody knows it exists. If it works well, nobody knows it exists. If it doesn't work well, then people know you exist and they want to rip you out. So it's a bit of a mugs game. I'm not sure you should ever build developer tools or middleware. But if you are going to go that direction, and many companies do, you have this situation where if your product's great, it disappears, and there's no way to necessarily get the organization to adopt more except organically. And so it's a challenge. So I was looking at our sales numbers, and every year we got 1 or 2 customers that would buy $1 million or more of our software, but everyone else was buying 50 to 100K of our software. And I was like, well, what's the difference? Why every once in a while we get one? Is it just the size of the company or the size of demand? And so I decided in 2014 that I would go on the road with our best salespeople for 3 months. And I'd sit in on all the conversations. And I went out on month 1. I went on loads of sales calls and sales meetings. And after the first month, I realized that there was no way we could reliably or repeatably sell million-dollar contracts selling integration, right? That became really clear. And so that's the product market fit. Even though we had integration, everyone needed integration, you just could not sell integration as it was being sold by every company that sells integration that way. And then for the next 2 months, I started working on, well, what if we gave these organizations a roadmap, not to just connect applications, but really to start unlocking the value of their assets, right? Which is basically what integration is. Integration is the activity, but unlocking the assets ties integration to business value, right? So when you're looking for the economic buyer, the key thing is you have to find how to attach what you're building to economic value. If you can't do it, chances are you can have a good company, you're just not going to have a really big organization, unicorn, whatever you want to call it. And so we started building this different go-to-market strategy where I actually defined a very simple methodology on how to unlock applications through APIs. So APIs, if you're in software, you'll know are really the building block for any new piece of software that comes out. But bear in mind, the companies that you often sell to don't have much in the way of APIs, right? They have all these old legacy systems, they have all these old databases, everything is all over the place. And so getting them to think about APIs as a way to create reusable assets within the organization was the key for us to get them realizing that integration wasn't about just connecting to applications, but it was about unlocking the value in the organization. And it was amazing. So in 2014, by the end of 2014, we'd sort of figured out this model. We did our first couple of deals. And in 2015, I put a little tiger team together, a few salespeople that could really get this concept. And we went out and started selling. And in the first 6 months, we sold $4 million deals. At that point, we thought, okay, well, now let's have a training program and enable more of the sales organization to go and sell this way. And it was incredible. We went from $6 million ACV deals in 2015 to 32 in 2016 to 78 in 2017 when we were public, and then to like over 100. But think about how powerful that is. We did not change our software, right? So we didn't build new software. We didn't build new products. All we did is we put a lot of effort into figuring out what the product market fit and really what the product buyer fit should actually look like. And I think this is the difference between a good company and a great company is if you just sell products without really getting that product buyer fit, you just don't get to the same scale. And amazingly, we did it with, like I say, without changing the software, without really changing much in the team. So suddenly, instead of selling 100K ACV deals, we were doing more and more 500 or 1 million ACV deals, purely because we just got good at figuring out how we should sell this software within an organization. And at some point, you just get this flywheel going, and it becomes unstoppable. And that's what happened with Mulesoft. It just became, we just became known in the market as if you were going through digital transformation, you needed to have Mulesoft there because we had a methodology to help you figure out how to unlock all those digital capabilities and assets. And suddenly, I didn't have to really fight to talk to CIOs. They would come to us. Then CEOs started coming as well because they wanted to understand their own digital strategy within the organization. And the rest is history. So that, I mean, I always, when I'm talking to my, the companies I invest in, we always talk about these two things, is the product is important, there has to be some differentiation, but what's more important is how you attach value. So, this is a bit different, by the way. So if you've ever done, if you work in a consumer product, it's almost exactly the opposite. The consumer product, it is all about the product. And you know very quickly if people like it or not. In the enterprise space, the product has to be good, but you get rewarded for consistency over innovation, right? Because what enterprises really want, they want the software they put into their organizations to work. They want to work it consistently, and they want it to work at scale. So, the type of things that we look at and invest in don't always tend to be completely super innovative. We look at things that improve some part of the market, but have a team behind it that understand how to reliably build that software, get it to market, and have the tenacity. I look for tenacity every time in founders. Have the tenacity to keep running at the same idea, trying to find the right economic buyer within these organizations. And it's, you know, I don't think, it's weird because if I put myself in your shoes, if I was sitting there 10 years ago, someone told me this, I'm not sure I would have fully understood it. But it's amazing that if you just spend time there, if you really think about getting to know your buyer versus just hoping that the market will select your software, then you can actually really accelerate your growth and success within, it happens within a year. It's pretty amazing. So that's one thing I want to leave you with. The other big thing that we did, and I think a lot of you can relate to this if you've ever built teams, is we focused a massive amount of time on hiring. Right, so everyone talks about this. If you go online, there's like 1,000 blog posts about good hiring, good management, good mentorship, good hiring processes. When I started Mulesoft, those blog posts weren't there. There was actually one book that was really good. It was by Lou Alder, and it was called Hire With Your Head. And I'd recommend reading it, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But as you know, when you hire people, it's very natural in the first 5 seconds to make a judgment on that person. And definitely within the first 15 minutes, if you check yourself, mentally, you're already leaning to some sort of decision. And what Hire With Your Head taught me to do was not do that. It was to go in, continuously ask questions for 45 minutes, capture all the information, and keep my mind free of judgments until the very end of the interview. Right, and even to the point where the person asks questions, because the questions people ask is also really interesting. The reason we went down this path, not because we had some great insight about we had to hire the best people, but we had a couple of really bad hires, and those hires made an absolute mess of certain things. I won't name names, but it's pretty interesting. When you're only a team of 20 people and you hire 1 or 2 bad people, it can have a disastrous impact on your ability to grow and move forward. So we realized, okay, well, we have to hire the best people, duh, of course, right? But how do you do it? Well, integration back then wasn't interesting to people. Maybe it isn't even interesting now, frankly. But it's necessary. It's the way information moves between all the applications. But we were in San Francisco, and at the time, mobile was booming, and Google and Facebook were just like mopping up engineers like there was no tomorrow. And it was impossible to find people. And we had to find people that really wanted to work on the type of problems that we were working on. And so what we did is we created a culture around hiring. So very different from just having a good hiring process. But we started to indoctrinate people in the organization about our values in hiring, what we were looking for, how to ask the hard questions in an interview, and never what we used to call close one eye. And you know, you look at someone, you say, they should be okay, but you know you have some doubts. And then what we did, we also introduced this concept in every hiring process of a bar raiser, someone who was there to both coach the hiring team on, you know, so when we do feedback loops on a candidate, and people would give you sort of very qualitative feedback, we'd look for more quantitative feedback. When it was more populist feedback, we'd push them and say, no, you can't say you like the person. You've got to tell us what they did that was interesting, right? What's their track record of achievement? Where have they really excelled? Like, we know we should look for these things, but we don't always do it. And especially, you know, I remember I was probably interviewing 10 people a week, which is a big chunk of time. That's about a day and a half a week of interviewing and then doing all the feedback loops. And it's exhausting. And you have to remind yourself, every time you go into that room to talk to someone, that you have to, A, give them a fair chance. You can't bring your baggage into the room and be frustrated because this is an interview at 7 p.m. in the evening and you're missing something that you really wanted to go to. Secondly, you have to force yourself to keep asking the questions, go deep every time, especially with engineers, by the way, because engineers are terrible at actually articulating how good they are. The ones who do it right off the bat make me suspicious. Because most engineers, right, when you ask them, what did you do? They say, well, you know, I worked on the back end. It's like, okay. And you could stop there and you say, well, what bit did you work on? And they always say, we did this and we did that. I'm like, but what did you do specifically? And it turns out, the person you're speaking to did something pretty fundamental in the piece of software that they created that made a massive impact. And I don't think they've even realized themselves how valuable that was. So you have to really dig in to find the gems. With salespeople, it's the exact opposite. They're very good at selling themselves, and it's exhausting because you ask them questions, and in your head you're thinking, how narrow can I make the response for this question so I don't get their life story every time? But it's a real art. And the problem is, I could get good at it. I had a CEO that I hired, and he got very good at it. We had a COO as well. We had a good exec team that were good at hiring. The problem is as you scale, you've got to get everyone else in the organization good at hiring too. And the only way, the way we found we could do it was actually building hiring into the culture of the company. And we used to say, for anyone in the organization, because we're a high growth company at the time, 30% of your time, you should expect 30% of your time will be on hiring or mentoring activities. We set that right from the outset so that people wouldn't grumble when they were on an interview panel. They wouldn't grumble when they had to shadow someone for the first couple of weeks. And we sort of made it into this is actually really good career growth, because at some point, you're going to be working with other teams, you're going to be hiring people later on in your career. Having these skills and instilling in you is going to actually be really valuable to you. And we made it into a perk, which is kind of interesting, because most people look at interviewing as not a perk, but actually a necessary evil, a bit like integration. And I think that made a massive difference. The other thing we did, which I mentioned before, but I'll say it again, is we also introduced this concept of bar raisers in the interview process. So up until 1,500 people, employees at Mulesoft, either myself, my CEO, or our COO had spoken to that person. So we never let go of hiring, and we ended up being the key bar raisers. And the reason you have to, it's exhausting. It consumes so much of your time. But once you witness a bad employee come in, and bad, I'm not saying evil, but just they do the wrong things. They're not thinking about the company the right way. The attitude they bring is different to the culture you're trying to build. That's what I mean by bad. You bring enough of those bad people in, you start to lose control of the organization that you were trying to build in the first place. So for us, it became really important that we should always stay involved and be the bar raisers in the interview process. And it was very frustrating for people, especially as we got bigger and we had to hire 500 people in a year, that it would get to myself or Simon or Greg, and everyone did loads of work, but when it came to us, we realized they haven't really done what's necessary to understand if this person's going to be successful. And we either push it back or we say no. And it was hard for us because people would get frustrated with that. They'd try and circumvent it. But I truly believe that we could not have built our company the way we did had we had not run the interview process the way we did. So I don't know how much time we have left, but the couple of key takeaways here for me are, one, on the product side, product is interesting, and especially if you're involved in the hackathon or you're just starting a company, building product is everything that consumes you. It's the reason why you start a company, because you want to go solve a problem. But the reality is the product usually is only one piece of the equation, and the other critical piece is figuring out how to reach the economic buyer and how to attach value for that economic buyer to the software you're building. It sounds very straightforward, but it's amazing, and I've invested in 40 startups over the last 5 years. And it's amazing how few of them really get this and really understand it, because the fun bit of starting a company and raising money is actually getting money to build things that you want to build, especially for technical founders. So I always push my technical founders to really get much more involved on the go-to-market side, to really understand how to attach value to the things they're building. And then the other one, like I say, is hiring. Hiring, I think in any organization, is super difficult. It's gotten harder because technical resources, not just developers, but anyone that understands software, understands how to build new types of products, understands how to run customer success or operate in a more customer success mentality, are becoming harder and harder to find. So the best thing you can do is instill your hiring values into the onboarding for any new employee and start weaving a hiring culture as part of your business. Especially if you're hiring, it doesn't really matter if you're hiring 10 people or 100 people. The sooner you can do that, I think the more successful you'll be at building the type of organization where people really respect their peers and the mentors around them, and actually coming to work every day is a real joy. So I'll stop there. That's our story. As I say, as I invest in new startups, I just see a lot of companies struggling with these three things. There's a bunch of other things. I'm talking again at the hackathon, but I'll be talking more about what founders can do to get ready to start a company, because there's some things you can do personally to sort of prepare yourself to basically build a team around you, but also do these things like figure out how to hire, how to build a product that you can actually connect to value in the market, and obviously be successful. Okay, I'll stop there. Should we take some questions?
Yeah, we'll take some questions.
If there's any questions, I mean, maybe there isn't. Oh, there is one. There you go.
Can we get a mic out there? Yeah, we got a mic coming out there. That'd be great. Social distancing mic, right? That's
brilliant.
I really like the approach with the hiring and how the bar or raiser.
Yep.
But on the other side, it's also a big trust to your employees to let them do the hiring. Mm-hmm. So how do you tackle that?
It's a good question. So what we did, especially the heads of department, so the ones that had the head count to hire, we would coach them early, like especially if they're new, we'd coach them early on what we're looking for. And the purpose of the bar raiser wasn't to be a stage gate. And we had this problem. So a lot of people said, well, hang on, it doesn't feel like you trust us because you get the ultimate say. But the reality was, if we looked at the data, and we used to look at data a lot to see what was going on, in the early days, it definitely seemed like we were being a gatekeeper. But over time, the organization just got better at hiring. And there's a point where certain departments are just nailing it because the leadership team have figured it out. They're doing the bar raising for you. And when that happened, we would let go of it, right? So, but we still got to a pretty big scale before that happened. I would definitely say the first 500 people, I think it's good to be involved. I think after that, you really want to be looking at the data, seeing how candidates are getting through and they seem to fit the right profile, and then sort of all you're really doing at that point is just verifying. You trust people, but you're just verifying every now and again. So we just do spot checks, and that worked okay. Yeah.
And I think that's a theme we've actually heard throughout the past couple of days. I mean, you mentioned it, product, but also culture, because I think that has a big influence. And I think it's pretty cool that you, even for an employee, like if you're about to join, that you get to meet somebody at that level and that's that involved with the company. Plus also, I think as a founder, you know the culture a lot better than almost anybody else since you kind of built it. And, there's this, maybe an energy or something where you just know that maybe it's not a fit. And you just, it gives you that additional opportunity to help sort out the bad apples.
It does.
We have time for some more questions. Does anybody have any other questions? It's a good chance to.
No. Oh, one more there, look.
Oh, yeah, sorry. The table's in the way.
Oh, that one.
You mentioned before that when you go into an interview that you, after 5 minutes, have a gut feeling, but you stop this gut feeling and go to the end. How is the relevance between the first your impression after the first 5 minutes to the end? Is it practically the same, or did your impression change a lot during the interview?
It depended on the role. So you might have got my the way I think about hiring engineers versus hiring salespeople. So with engineers, it can often feel like, okay, this is heavy going, It's actually, I find it hard work. I used to find it hard work to interview engineers because they don't often, I'm not saying everyone, but they often don't volunteer a lot of information for whatever reason. Either they're humble or they're unconscious competent, right? They're good, but they don't know they're good, especially in younger engineers. And so digging was difficult. And so if you take the first 15, 20 seconds, in my head is like, I'm exhausted, it's been a long day, this is going to be really difficult. And you have to put that aside. And quite often what I do is, I have this thing 30 seconds before the interview, I would just go into a spare room somewhere. We had lots of these little work rooms, and like just breathe for just 15 seconds, just to let go of all the other stuff, because you're less likely to judge if you're, if you're balanced, if you're centered. And it just worked for me that I could just clear my head, go in, and treat this like the first interview I did for the company years ago. That's what I try to shoot for. And then the biases, you do have biases, but you have to keep, if you feel a bias happening and you start to feel it because you get conscious of it, you just tell yourself to ask more questions, go deeper. You make an assumption because the person is not very articulate about something. Well, if they're not articulate, you've got to go and ask the question and say, tell me more about that. Tell me exactly the role you played in that. And who else was working with you? What did the team dynamic look like? You have to ask all the questions around the thing that they're saying to get a better picture of really what that person did.
Is that digging where the name Dig Ventures comes from?
Actually, Dig Ventures is purely, I only invest in things that I dig.
Okay.
So I don't care. I do Dig Ventures, by the way, not because I want to be a VC. That's actually probably not what I want to be. But I do it because I love to work with founders. I love to hear how people are solving problems because, the problems I solved was 10 years ago now. So my knowledge on actually how to solve problems today is pretty stale as an operator. Like, you shouldn't trust me if I come and tell you how to do something. But talking to founders, I stay connected to the way they're solving problems, the way they're thinking about the market, and that's actually really super rewarding for me. But I mean, I'm only going to back companies that I really like versus investments that make sense. That's why it's called Dig.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you very much. You'll be around for a little bit afterwards, right? To chat?
Yeah, I'm here. Right. I'm here also for the
and the hackathon, right?
Hackathon.
Sorry. Right.
Yes. So I'm around.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. A big round of applause. We've got a little something for you. I hope you dig it.
Lovely. I do dig it. That's amazing. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.